Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the MSP Initiative Live, hashtag MSP Talk. Today we bring back the wonderful, interesting Mr. Matt Lee. But before we get into anything interesting, just some housekeeping. So this session is being recorded, just like every other session we've ever done since we started MSP Initiative. You'll find them at mspinitiative.com. I know initiative sometimes can be hard to spell, but I promise you, if you get there, it is there. It'll be under a tab called Sessions. So it'll be an audio and video format, whichever you prefer. A couple of other things you'll find on that page. We are doing an event called MSP Community Minds, which Mr. Matt Lee will be involved with in Denver, August 14th and 15th. We'll talk a little bit about that. Completely free to MSPs. You just have to get there. But otherwise, it's 2 days of hopefully workshop style sessions where we can get you past death by PowerPoint and more into something you can walk out with tangibly. At least you started something. I don't know if you finished it. So there's MSP Community Minds. Please circle that in your schedule, August 14th, 15th, Denver. Then we have all of the community block parties for the rest of the year. We had several internationally. We had London, we had Prague, which was pretty cool. We have Dublin coming up. If you're going to DattoCon Dublin at the end of June, we have a really cool venue. I promise it's one that'll be memorable. So DattoCon Dublin at the end of June is our next block party. Then we have DattoCon in Miami, which is the first week in October. So if you're headed down there, we will be doing a block party down there in Florida. And funny enough, the rest of the block parties are also in Florida. We're going to be headed down to Fort Lauderdale to the Taylor Business Group Big Conference. Very peer group focused. You don't have to be, formally involved with them to join their event. So if you haven't heard of the Taylor Business Group Big Conference, Google it. We'll be doing a 5-story mega yacht party down the Intercoastal. We did this last year. It worked out really well. So hopefully we do this part 2. Weather is always interesting in Florida. And Speaking of which, the very last one, the big one in Orlando, second week of, I believe it's November 8th is going to be the date. That's where we last year had the largest hurricane party ever. I'm not sure. Didn't call Guinness World Book, but we had the All-American Rejects last year. We are down to our last 5 bands that we're waiting on confirmations who's available. And we promise to announce it early so that you guys can, circle your friends, your kids, whoever else likes to, see some of these people live that otherwise you'd have to go out of your way to buy a ticket for. And we're going to bring a free concert to you. And of course, we love the block party. So last couple of things, there's community offers. A handful of companies have just offered, this group, the MSP Initiative community, which is anyone who listens to this podcast. You can just go and check out the offers. If anything, tickles you, feel free to take advantage. And lastly is the industry calendar, which is just us doing homework for everyone. I know a bunch of people try and consolidate things, but just keep an eye on what's happening in and around the sandbox. And if there's something that you fancy, definitely join us out and about in the world. I would argue Matt Lee might beat me on mileage this year, but I don't know. I got some international miles under.
Yeah, the Prague one's pretty rough. And I'm going to Banff, but that's not near as far.
3 trains and 3 planes. So yeah. I argue we could have probably done a direct flight for like quadruple the price, but then there's no story to tell, I guess.
That's true. That is true.
Matt, how you doing, man? I saw you down at GeekCon literally like 48 hours ago.
Yep.
It was, I guess, 10 years in the making. It used to be called Lab Tech Geek, right? And then they kind of, switched it to MSP Geek, kind of broadened it a little bit. Very techie, engineer focused. I think that was a cool first event. What'd you think?
Yeah, I think it tapped in a couple of things, right? Like the first would be that it was exactly what you said. You had a bunch of geeks, a bunch of the wrench turners, a bunch of the engineers, a bunch of the people that, is where I come from, all getting together initially 10 years ago to solve common challenges and common issues and automation challenges and things that they were tasked to do to solve this, efficiency challenge, right? The last 11 years of MSPs has been efficiency challenge, right? It's been all about the EBITDA multipliers. It's been all about the, W2 costs and W2 multipliers, the RIM, reactive hours per endpoint, all those things. And those were all built up on the backs of a lot of these engineers. What I think I wanted to say that for is that getting them all together and giving them a place where it's catered to growing more of those engineers, growing more of those people and the skill sets and the capabilities and the understanding of where we came from. And also it tapped on a concept that I heard from several vendors, which was, we signed several deals right here. We didn't expect that. These are the technical resource. Yeah, but at the end of the day, back when I was the technical resource, I was an influencer to the point of, Matt, should we sign a contract with them or not? Yes, no. And so now you've gathered those humans in a room together with these vendors and partners, right? So I feel like there is a untapped market that Right of Boom touched on, in the sense that the security side is going to be very heavily engineering focused in a lot of ways. And obviously a little bit of duality, but I guess what we're getting at is, you're starting to see less of the marketing hype type conferences and more of the teach them and they will buy type conferences. Now there's room for all of it, I get, but that started almost a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, with Right of Boom was, I think, one of the first ones in our little sandbox, if you will, that really went down that road and then replicated again this year. But even with that said, you watched IT Nation Secure last year become significantly more technical in teaching, and this year even more so, right? And you watch the workshops and the pre-days and things stop being, flashy marketing stuff and more about the how do we get this job done. And if you take all that down and codify the why, in my opinion, we're finally back in one of those stages where we're having to build the next great thing as MSPs. We're having to run over the top of the next insurmountable hill. From how do I go from reactive and hour-based models to billing and then actually providing value? And then you see that even shift over time as it became VCIOs and VCISOs. But I think we're at this stage where we're having to grow immensely. And conferences that teach that and do that are invested in and are successful. So you didn't ask for the 33,000 word answer, but that's
No,
what I
no,
usually
no.
do.
Listen, here's the thing. I think they had something like 300-ish people there. Like, when I take out vendors
Yeah.
and staff and all the other stuff, that's pretty good for
For a
first-time
first year
event, to be honest.
conference. I mean,
And they said they surveyed those attendees. Just about half of them had never been to a channel event ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
53%. I think the final number was 407 attendees that registered and showed up. I think that the 53% not being there the first time, I bet there's an even interesting stat, had they asked it, of how many of this is less than your fifth conference? How many of you is this less than your third conference? And I remember, I look back on my wall, so everybody knows it's on this and listening. I work for PAX8. They are awesome. We're doing PAX8 Beyond this year. It's going to be fantastic. Maybe we dig into that in a minute. But all the way over here on the left, my first badge actually was a PAX8 conference. I walked into a technical boot camp with PAX8 that I still get, and you can ask people inside PAX8 when we do our boot camps, I'm the most critical person ever, because I had that childlike wonder of going somewhere, learning something, being exposed to awesome things, right? And so nothing's ever returned anything like that ever again, because it is that first one. But as you watch numbers 2 and 3 and 4, they were like a Dell conference, and my next major one, I think, was a Continuum conference, and it was massive and fantastic. And I think the reason I bring that up is those 53% that had never been to a conference, and maybe even the encompassing 10, 15 additional that had only been to 2 or 3, for them, I think it was the perfect venue. I don't think it was overstated. They made it fun. They had board games. They built community. They built camaraderie, and they taught. And you started it off with Kelvin's A Beginner's Mind, right? When you think about a beginner's mind, it's this understanding of, why am I so arrogant to believe that everything I think is true just because I think it, right? And I feel like it's this concept of what I like is one of my best compliments I ever received, which was, Matt, you hold extremely loosely to passionate beliefs. Yeah. If I get new data, I'll change. But until then, I'm gonna scream it from the rooftops, right?
That's fair. That's fair. But let me throw one out there. I actually did a session with Terry Hedden while we were at GeekCon on Tuesday, and Terry actually brought some data with him on that call. So if you go on LinkedIn, I posted it this morning. He pulled the data from the NCIS codes or NCIC, basically, but it's the the
National
number of
Criminal
businesses.
Information Center.
No, different one. Maybe I'm saying it wrong,
No.
but basically, it's the codes that you use to categorize what type of business you are when you file your tax return. So maybe I'm just using the wrong acronym, but effectively, he took the data of number of businesses in the United States, and then it categorized by number of employees per business. And Matt, we've heard in a lot of different venues, hey, set a minimum, only take customers in your, kind of sweet spot, this, that, and the other.
Sure.
And some of that has a lot of truth to it. But then when you apply the numbers to it, Matt, let's say you targeted companies 50 employees and above in all 50 states and whatever territories outside of 50 states. Do you know that's less than 1% of the available businesses in the country?
Yeah. Yeah. And those 20 and less are probably something like 43, 50%, probably, if I had to guess.
One to five employees is 78%.
Oh, wow. Yep.
So listen, Terry was coming at it from a lead gen standpoint. And he's like, listen, if you
Sure.
take your addressable market and you shrink it down to such a small footprint, like you're really, kind of crowded now, right? In a small space. I guess, Wayne Selk kind of flipped it this morning on LinkedIn. He said, look at the amount of people that aren't getting the level of help that they need to be doing things correctly, securely, properly. And like compared to the bigger businesses, that means that 78% and above are the people that are probably in trouble.
And it's security poverty, right? Like at the end of the day, what you're defining is kind of the poverty level for having a healthy cybersecurity. Now, granted, a lot of stuff is absolutely just practices and understanding that can be taught, that we can make part of the kind of endemic culture. But in the same breath, you look at the National Cybersecurity Strategy from March and also some of the earlier guidance from 2018. And you're seeing this understanding of, for those people, that super small business, the consumer, the goal is to shift that responsibility more into the service providers and people that create the software. And so if you think about that, that's like saying, when you combine that with CISA's secure by default, secure by design, you're saying, hey, Microsoft, maybe you should have MFA as a baseline one for everyone. Hey, Google, maybe you should have these type of security capabilities and logging. And right. And you start getting into this conversation of, we have to do a combination of a couple of things, where one is the ability to scale support down to the micro unit. And I think that's very possible. If you start looking at what Azure Active Directory, since we're talking about nerdy conferences, I'll be nerdy. Azure Active Directory or some identity platform, Okta or whatever it may be before it, right? And then you extend that into device management is handled by that. My SaaS management is handled through SSO. All of my logins, everything can be piped into the same Sentinel or could be exported to the same provider that's actually service provider out there doing security services at scale, a SOC as a service like Pillar or Blackpoint, or all of the MDR services that are out there where you can outsource. And the reason is it's because you're normalizing the data. You're making it to where it is the same type of implementations with varying nuances, but pretty much the same levers, the same switches that we can flip from a security perspective across everyone. It's interesting. Diana Giles, you've probably had her on your show. She's awesome. She came into one of my early classes about using platform type services like this and, things that are more SaaS delivered. And we talked about this Microsoft lens. And she said, the second year she came back after that first year and she started implementing this with her super small clients. She started working with people, and she had this client of 2 people that had this massive government contract that would be extremely profitable, saying, hey, maybe we can't meet this. We can't do these type of requirements they just put in this requirement in this RFP. And she said, no, I'm doing all of this with Microsoft for you. Let me show you. Here's what we're doing. And when you're 100% native in that world, you have the ability to even script most of that. You're now doing it with CIPP. You're doing it with things, from Kelvin, and you're doing things with Microsoft Lighthouse, and you're doing things with scripts and PowerShell that you've built yourself and extensibility there. But furthermore, the identity side of that now becomes normalized, which means that you're now seeing people do that at scale for the unit of one. For George, I can protect George, at least in the context of the way the telemetry is going to go off. So much so you saw Heath Adams with TCM, who wrote the pen testing tests that I took my PNPT, says, when you talk about a cloud pen test, that's not what it is. It's a cloud configuration check, because the checks are just going to say the exact same outcomes, right? There is not much delineability that exists. If the setting is set one way, it's one way without much exception, except for the defined exceptions. And what's great about that is you now have a very easy way to set a percentage of what is good and how you might measure that. So taking this all the way down to what you were saying about how does one serve that super small client is by normalizing the count of variables and increasing the amount of automation, which also reduces the amount of stupid Matt clicking wrong button or typing an L when he meant an R, or right. Like, and so you see this world shifting to where
it's also making sure that those settings remain that way over time, right? I think part of the problem is if you do a point in time check, it's good 6 months ago, then what happened between then and now, and did they stay that way, right?
Well, and that's the other nice thing about that type of a normalized thing. It's an API. I'm making an API call and I can do X number of API. I mean, this is preaching to the guy that's an API guy. So like, we follow, right? But I'm just pulling that data. I can pull that data constantly. And you start seeing insurance companies are leaning down that path. People are starting to say, I can check this constantly if we're in this model. I can just see if there's delta. I mean, look at LionGuard. They built their whole world on being able to surface that delta.
Well, hold on. This actually segues into, so Austin McCord, former founder of Datto, started a new company just recently, I think within the last week or two. And like their whole premise is it's a warranty, not an insurance. Maybe that's just a legal kind of fine line. But
just trying to define.
But basically their SaaS product scans your environment, right? Scans your cloud environment, scans your premise-based environment, and then gives you kind of like a credit score, right? Like gives you, and then like based on that, they instantly underwrite, like I guess they've pre-negotiated whatever it is. And like underwriting says, all right,
probably
well, you fit within this number. You fit within this number. Here's your available coverage by here.
Let's decouple from the company, but let's just say in general and principle, what is insurance if you were talking about it? Insurance is taking something measurable, defining classes of insureds based on actuarial data, right? And then billing appropriately for those classes of insureds against their actual risk from a loss and profit ratio. That's essentially what insurance is. It's organized gambling, where they know all the data. But when you look
I feel like it's the casino, they always win.
It's just like the casino. They still probably always win. That's why there's profit in insurance. That's why there's a market for it, right? But I think the point is that when you take that, they're really good at getting the math down to separated classes of insureds that they can charge different rates on based on the risk of loss or not take on. And so when you get at that, when you come to a traditional model of security and a traditional model of technology, it's very infrastructural. It's very beep, beep, boop, boop, this stuff, that stuff, measure, look for, and all those. But when you come to a more normalized scenario where you're not taking tons of disparate systems, tons of infrastructural reliance and system structure, and moving it more to an identity structure, identity centrism, and more things are regulated and normalized across the border. Now, the joke aside of, well, that's just Microsoft now not doing it, fair. But I can now police one $5 billion situation than millions of $10 situations, right? And so I think being a little, summative, I suppose. But the point is that when you do this, when you're measuring and doing it directly at a normalized set of variables, and there aren't any other variables, it's only this canvas, I can get down to that. Just like me being fat and having high blood pressure, the body has a certain canvas right now for life insurance actuarial aspects, right? Doesn't have a disease that's going to kill him, no predisposition in family. Most recent relatives haven't died of the things that we're afraid of this being, not super fat, taking blood pressure medicine, exercising, not this drink, not this drugs, those things. So when you think about that, that's what we're trying to do in cyber. But for the first time, we're getting to where the variable template, the variable canvas goes from a near unlimited, server 2003, 8, 8R2, 12, 12R2, 16, 19, 20, forest function 2003, 3R2, 8, 8R2, 12, 12R2, 16. All of those things go to API, graph, Microsoft, outcome this. You see this very, very, very limited factor set that can be easily determined as a summative risk. I mean, look at Microsoft's secure score in their environment where they say, here's all the things, they add up to extra points and you get to this level. So I'm overstating your point, but I do believe it will be much more possible to ensure an industry there. There's still big gaps in the sense of efficacy of service, efficacy of response. But the more and more that becomes automated, the more and more you have normalized service providers that are doing that. And I can say to the insurance company, yes, it's all modern. And yes, I'm using Blackpoint. And here's the agent you can use to monitor it. You now get into a very interesting and insurable space around that. I'm definitely being summative, but that
no, I
long
mean,
form.
I feel like, just in Q4 of last year, we were hearing from people like TechRug and a couple other guys that are very specific, very niche right into this space, saying, hey, there could be a scenario where like this thing consolidates down to 2 or 3 insurance companies globally that'll do it.
Sure.
And everybody else is gonna check out. Here we've seen the opposite, right? Like new approach, new player. I mean, I hope that this is a pivot, right?
It is. I think you're seeing it. I mean, you go back. I think Wes Spencer broke this out. The Chubb report from last year really starts talking about some of these things. And we are actually, for the first time, seeing profit ratios get better in insurance. We are starting to see this normalized. But you're also seeing it go from a 1-page, literally, yep, there's fog on it, he's alive, insurance application to an actual 17-page guide that asked me to give a blood sample in my 2 youngest children. By the way, John, I'm going to need you to go to the insurance company, buddy. Thanks for the tea. But no, you're seeing that shift. So I do believe we're at a point where this becomes somewhat sustainable. But what you're referencing is this challenge in understanding histrionically, about 8 months ago, where I think it was the AIG executive said, maybe this is going the way of national floodplain insurance. Maybe this is such a big risk that we can never deal with it. It could never be insured. So we need to set up that if you're below the 100-year floodplain line, the United States government's going to insure you, and it's going to be under NFIP, and that's the way it's going to work. And it's going to be a somewhat self-insured model. I think that was an early statement from a lot of pain. I think that conversation comes from a lot of chaos, but you said you had S1 installed. Yeah, but what settings? Like, how'd you have it set up? What did you have done with it? Like, those things come into massive play there and weren't accounted for. And so they made up crap data to make actuarial separations, and you just watch that asymptotically rise. But then you start seeing them put policy limits, change the structure of how they're doing it, right? Limit what they're going to sell, charging more for things that might have more exposure. They've started to normalize the costs of the market. You have incident responders and DFR teams that already have pre-staged costs with insurance. And so a lot of factors coming together, in my opinion, on a lot of this. But at the same time, I think the conversation of this is a big problem for the U.S. to solve is still true, but in a different way. And I think it comes back to, if I go out on the street and I live in a decent neighborhood, but let's say I didn't live in a decent neighborhood, any vehicle within my grasp would have come from the factory safe and at a certain level of standards and a certain level of things that probably doesn't kill me if I bump into the rear of it. I'm looking at you, Pinto and Fire Arrow. But when we get into this conference, the Fiero, anyways, the Pontiac, they both had explodey type things. But the point is that we now are in a situation where, as a consumer, Microsoft does sell me my car with airbags turned off, and the seatbelt beepy thingy, I have to turn it on if I want it. How the hell do you change a culture if I already don't like to buckle up and the only thing that makes me is the beepy thingy? I'm still too stupid of my own good to want to buckle up.
So you talk to people at Microsoft on the regular.
Yeah.
What are they saying?
They're going full steam into these things. They're just like everybody else, trying to matriculate through this. And I think that's what I've come to, George. And you've heard me say this to you directly as we're talking about your own company. I don't fault any company right now for being where they are in a cybersecurity posture. And I don't want that to sound too not harsh, but what I mean is that we're all set up for failure and we're all going through this together. And what I do fault companies for is not leaning into that and moving forward with that and doing their part to change it. I'm on a Microsoft baselines call where we're trying to decide what is the bare minimum. Like, there's what Matt would do. I would get into escalating conditional access that has escalating conditional accesses for different data sensitivities. I would have things that try to, say, self-service password reset. You can't do that unless you're already on a healthy device, you're already on a limited faction, or else I'll have to do it for you. But I will do it for the ones that are the masses that are on healthy devices but what's the bare minimum? What is that has to be that's bare minimum? How do you define what that entry-level minimum should be? And so we're working through a lot of that as a working group and with some really, really smart people. I just happen to sneak in. But I do think a lot of the companies out there are dealing with this in their own way, and some with effort and some not, right? I mean, look at Facebook's privacy fine and GDPR for $1.5 billion. That was just the cost of doing business. It was still 1.5 of 28 billion, right? Like,
that's a lot of money.
Yeah. And the product is selling that data, right? So anyways, this is a systemic, capitalistic, and overall global problem that we're all trying to solve. And I think, to your point, the inequity falls on the SMB because, by God, the amount of tools, skills, and capabilities aren't there, and nor is the dollar vote to tell somebody this isn't okay. So I think you'll start seeing more and more class action lawsuits of SMBs handled by attorneys and shaping this from the litigiousness. You've heard me talk about that with Brad a few times, but you're already seeing it. Yeah,
we're definitely looking for part 2 of Brad and Matt, where we can get into
we haven't done it yet. Topic. We need to. I need to get settled for a minute.
Community minds.
Yeah.
So how about yesterday? Microsoft came out and said that they have stumbled upon China-based hackers that were infiltrated very important systems in United States. Have you had a chance to read into that one? What do you think?
I haven't. That one's escaped my my view. So we get 1 point. This is like 4 points for George. You've scooped me a few times, haven't you? Right? Like
Well,
I have to get into my system. No.
I keep my eyeball on a few things from
Oh,
time to
but this
time.
is a retelling of an earlier one. I've seen this before about this bulletin, but still fair. To be fair, it is them. You know, Satya stood up and said, "We want to be a security company." What, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, I guess. And
Mhm.
I would say, true to form, they've got the biggest data set. They have the ability to hire the people to hunt through it, and they're coming out and talking about what this victims went through, right? And so I think what's interesting is we've seen several of these from Microsoft, where Microsoft's actually given this data out multiple times. But thanks for getting this one on my radar. I didn't know they had re-released this about this particular one.
Well,
So
I guess the reason I bring it up, other than to hear your opinion on it, was, hey, the government, people who are making up the rules, have like shifted responsibility now from where they think, the private sector needs to take ownership, etc. But like they need to clean up their house too, right? Like I
yeah.
understand
Well,
that they're the big target, but still.
for example, I'm a member of InfraGard, right? Well, let's say I am, because InfraGard was compromised and they had to actually go back because of how bad their infrastructural system was and how they dealt with what they were doing, and revet every American citizen and every person that's in InfraGard. And so I'm now in the back end process of another FBI background check, validation of identity, all the things that should have been there in the first place. And to your point, this is why I don't want to point fingers. I know we all have this to deal with. We all are used to this, right? The first car was invented in like 1885 by Benz. It didn't have a seatbelt until 1950. We didn't have anything talking about regulation until 1965, at a time when a Cadillac had these like spikes that would come out of the dash from the air vents that if you got in a wreck would impale you, but they looked really cool and it made it feel very spaceshipy. So you look at this world where when Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed, that was the precursor and almost that level of amount of this being a problem that we now must address it at the national level. And in 1966, you had the first legislation on automobiles. I'm giving a general timeline to just say, we always make tech first. We always improve lives first, because I like laying in air conditioning and not sweating my fat butt off, right? So we always do it. And then we come back and realize the comeuppance and the risk and the death and the things. There's always patient 0 and patient 1,000 probably. And we're at this stage where we're now patient 100,000 and wondering, are we all going to come together to solve this? And the answer has always been in history, yes. Right? What's different though is if we were looking at a building in the 1800s and we saw this first 14-story building and we're looking up at the top of it, and you see a guy probably in a suit and a hat, because like they were idiots back then, like even more sweating, I guess, or maybe to hide the sweating. But you see the guy standing in the window and there's fire behind him and it's encompassing. And you see him standing and looking out over just an empty fall to his death. You had no problem when someone said, you know what? Maybe we should put in fire escapes. Let's do fire escapes. Everybody says yes, because you watch somebody splat or you pulled out a crispy critter. We're not in that stage in tech. And so it took longer. It's taking longer for that pain to be felt. But, mark my words, we're all built on a house of sand in a lot of these things. And it's going to take some real shoring up and building the right infrastructure and doing like we always do. If you took 1966 forward, from that legislation, it took a long time before you had full safety testing, and engineering challenges changed it so that instead of a crumple zone, we were now trying to eject the motor underneath the passenger capacities so that they would rise above it. And therefore the passenger shell was what was most protected. And we learned that through crash taste testing, not taste testing, that'd be really bad, but crash testing, that these things survive and have less G load and they have less catastrophic injury. And we see that then play out in real data and real national highway safety transportation things start being born. I'm getting at that we're in that magical phase where it's kind of been the Wild West, and we're now taking it from a technology and security perspective through the same exact challenges of regulation, oversight, minimum standards, things we must do, maybe at a pace that we hope to do it before it destroys us. Right. And you've kind of tapped in on why that's my mission, George. Like that's what I live for, is to try to help do my little part.
Let's hope like either two things don't happen. Like the Terminator storyline doesn't come true, or there's just like an EMP somewhere and all technology just blows up.
Yeah,
and
right. Both would really
on.
suck for humanity right now, right? And maybe that EMP is actually just the infrastructural attack against the things that are so loosely protected in our world by our adversaries, and us against others, right? Either way, the suffering's the same. But I think the point is that, you've nailed it on the head. We've got a lot of room to grow. And if we do it right and we don't have the major cataclysms on either end of that happen, then we can maybe get there. So
let's talk a little bit about Pax8 Beyond. I mean, this has
yeah,
been,
man,
I don't know, years in the making. I think it was supposed to originally be 2020, and then of course, pandemic
the
time.
thing.
So
Yeah.
it got moved, right?
Yeah.
2023. What are we in for, man? What are we looking forward to here?
Well, I don't want to steal the thunder of all the brilliant people that are putting this together, but Beyond is meant to take the thing I talked about that was so magical about the change in Right a Boom and the change in MSP GeekCon and in their own right, almost every conference in the last 2 years has changed for this thirst of knowledge. And so I think Beyond is hoping to be that. In fact, when it started out, it was almost all academy people teaching most of the sessions, and came up with topics that were voted on and brought up by those peers and brought up by those coached individuals. And so it started out there, but as time has gone on, it's gotten way more awesome. We've become more inclusive of more and more and more vendors, because if you want to teach, we want you there, right? We've had that conversation play out. And then we've even added, through popular demand, the security stuff we touched on in that business persona and in that tech persona wasn't enough. They really wanted a pure security engineering and understanding persona role, frankly, because everybody's trying to understand it. And so we ended up bringing in, Andrew Morgan with, from the creator of Right a Boom, and came in and brought in, John Strand and, John Murchison from Blackpoint, people that aren't even on our line card, to just come and purely educate. Right. This is their fourth or fifth time doing this in our community. But every time I see people walk out with just this moment of clarity on what they have to do as a security professional in today's day and age, from these events. And so we're going to be recreating that experience. We're going to be doing a really immersive lab experience to go along with with that I can't really talk about yet. But there's some really cool stuff coming, George. I appreciate you giving me a moment to talk about it. If you haven't signed up, please sign up. And if you're a giant security nerd and want to go, please reach out to me, and I will do what I can to get you there if I can. So
I mean, this thing is, I think, 17 days away in Denver.
Yeah.
I believe I actually just got a text last night that the room block's still open. You can still sneak into this thing. So
yeah, we're getting close though, but yeah.
Like it's time to decide. Like, if you're interested, even partially, take a look at it.
Yeah,
and
100%.
take 2 days out of your life and go to Denver. Yeah, no, absolutely.
You're going to be there. I'm looking forward to seeing you, and it's going to be fun.
I was ready for the first one. I'm ready for this one, because I guess this is 1A and 1B, because 1A didn't happen. So I'm pumped.
Yeah.
I'm still plugged in. Obviously, it's morphed since 2020 until now, which makes it even more intriguing.
As we all should do. We should grow, right? That's life. So
100%. So I think they already said there's 1,000 people registered.
I think that may be our cap, but we're dang close to that. And maybe I haven't looked at it in a few days, but I know we've been driving it. And I know 3-4 weeks ago, we were over 700. So I have to imagine we're nearing in on that pretty quick. So I don't get the data that often. I'm on the road all the time. So.
Well, one can just keep one eye on it.
But I bet Rob Ray knows exactly the number.
I'm sure he's getting push notifications as each registration comes through.
Yeah. Hey, there's Paul. I knew Jimmy would come. Yeah, he knows everybody too, so it's great.
100%. So funny enough, we're starting to see, because we can talk about travel woes, right? Because you do a lot of traveling like me. Bro. I started flying out of Newark Airport in New Jersey a lot more, because all the direct flights out of Philly moved, for like on American and a bunch of stuff. So they built this new Terminal A at Newark Airport in New Jersey. Apparently it took them 11 years and $2.7 billion. I'll take apart the main complaint, which is, how does the AirTran stop a mile short and you have to walk the rest? I'm not sure. I think that may have been an oversight. But that being said, so they built it more like a European style setup, where at every layer of the airport, even to the point where you're walking onto the plane through, give me your boarding pass, let me scan it. Yeah. You now are getting your photo taken.
Yeah, I saw that. You're starting to see biometric identification to compare with passports and identification.
So
systems.
That's a very European model, right? Because happening, and that was happening in London's airport and a bunch of other guys for a long time.
Let's pick it apart. Let's talk about security automation. What is the gap in let's say not security vis-a-vis antivirus, anti-malware, blah, 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 but anti-bad human, or anti-trafficked human, right? And so now I say, yes, because you made it through the first check, just because you have this ticket in your hand, you're now making it to the second check where we're not identifying IDs. And I would think you're automating that process of identifying humans. Now, if your name is maybe George something something, and you get pulled over and inspected all the time, and you are somehow on some list potentially that's asking for that, it makes it even more easy to identify you as you move around the building and such. I think, this is the natural progression. I don't know that I want to dig into the privacy implications of it, how those systems are protected and what that means when it comes down to those things based on our earlier conversation. I feel like it goes right back to we implement the tech before we talk about the implications almost all the time. And I think this is maybe another example of that, where the tech is there. We've had it a long time. We've had facial recognition a long time. We've had those type of things for a very long time. Now we're saying that's going to be endemic. And if you notice when you read it, they try to speak towards some privacy. Like, we will hold this for no more than 12 hours, comma, space. Some Americans and other external parties may be maintained for longer periods as deemed necessary. Right. So I've read that. Actually, I've seen it in 3 or 4 different airports in the last couple of weeks. And I don't see the cameras. I haven't seen them implemented fully yet. They've got iPads up, they've got things. But I think the point is they're implementing a technology to solve a need, you hope, right? At least if that's the case of if I'm talking to an MSP trying to buy a tool or put in a product or service.
Hold on. Let me stretch just one bit further. So
yeah.
we said I went to Prague the other week for the Enable event, and I drove into JFK for the first time in a decade. By the way, I hope that's the last time. It was 3 hours just to get to this freaking airport. Anyway, so for some reason, and I don't know what the reason is, it's not a good one in my opinion, they stopped TSA pre-check at 8:30 p.m. in JFK. So of course, like, doesn't matter whether you're priority or whatever, like, you're just stuck a little bit, right?
Yep.
And then they're like, oh, but you can sign up for Clear right there, right now. Take the 3-month trial, and then we'll just walk you in. And I'm like,
yeah.
Wait a minute. and then it's like, oh, they're doing the eyeball scan, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, what's the difference now, right? Are we getting to the point where, like, next is going to be the DNA check? What's happening here?
Well, you're kind of seeing them push it down to a service provider, right? Like, if you think about it that way, you're saying, hey, this is something we can't do in our government. We are not fast enough and flexible enough. Let's come up with a monetization model that allows us to push this to a service provider. But in many ways, you're seeing the outsourcing of identity to service providers in a lot of cases, right? Like, look at Clear. Clear is trying to vie to be that identity provider that's about the George, just the George. George might also be a citizen of the United States. George might also be a licensed practitioner in X or Y, right? And you see that happening in Canada. In fact, in Canada, with their national identity system, a company named Credivera is doing that work through distributed identities. I actually have a really cool thing that they recorded of me talking for their service. But their goal was to make it to where privacy shifts from your hands or from the company's hands into your hands. And it's this idea of, let's say I work for George. My identity at George is 100% matt@georgecompanies.com. Right? That's 100% the beginning of my root of identity. Now, it is on you as George to make sure that I am Matt, and that those Matt identities that I brought are there. And so you do your I-9 and you capture my passport and you get my, documents that say I'm me, right? And you do that work. And that as long as you have that process, then I'm actually me, and I started as me there. Well, you're starting to see that concept shift back to me. And technologically, right? So if you look at Microsoft bought a product called Intra. Intra is a verified identity, and it's a cryptographically verified something that I hold that then says that you have the me and I've signed it, it's me. But Credivera's taken that technology and gone further with it with DID-ION implementations, which is a distributed identity web version using DNS. But they take it and they have a wallet. They have this concept of a wallet, and I own this wallet. And in that wallet, I put in my driver's license. In that wallet, I put in my licenses from Credly or all the other things. And those are being generated by somebody that's an issuer. Anybody can become an issuer, right? So now I could be an issuer at the state of California. I could be an issuer at George's company. I could be an issuer that creates these attributes that I can hold and assert. What's interesting about that is now I don't have to give George, when I want to come work for you, my passport. I simply assert that I am me and have it. And you now have that privacy shift back into my hands. And those are things that are interesting plays on this concept of identity that's happening, right? You're shifting the privacy and the identity here. Now, if I come to work for you, my identity is still me. It feeds your identity and proves I'm me. And actually cryptographically all along the way can do that. And I'll give you a use case. In Canada, they're wanting to say, if I revoke someone's driver's license and they're a commercial driver, then I can actually, through the state, make it to where their identity no longer asserts they have a Class M or whatever it is up there, a commercial license. And as soon as that happens inside George's company's platform, I have lost my credential to be a driver inside your platform and I am disabled. And so you start seeing real world use cases where you could actually have assertions and identities tie with privacy in mind, but also serve their goal to say, Matt no longer has a commercial license, or Matt is no longer not being sued for his license, or right, things like that. They get into the way you could move issuance into a cryptographic, but also private state.
But hold on, let me go a little bit sci-fi on you. You remember the was like Bruce Willis, the Fifth Element. You remember the Fifth Element?
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
And he's driving the taxi in the beginning, and he like got enough points on his driver's license that the car stopped running.
Sure. Yeah.
So like, what's stopping that?
And I think it's about the paradigm you view it in. And I won't get into which way I would fall on it and what it means to be human and what tech has given and taken away. But it is definitely always in my mind about solving some problem. Now, that problem could be greed sometimes, but most of the time it is, well, we don't want someone to be driving if they don't have the right requirements or haven't met those responsibilities or whatever it may be. I think obviously sci-fi wise, you're taking it into credits and that, but there's certain concepts called social credits and social scores in China. So this has played out. You have seen these things happen in systems before. I think, bringing it all the way back to why we delved down this conversation is that technology gives a lot of things, gets implemented, and then we try to figure out ways to use it before we really think about all of the implications in things, right? Like even consider the fact that once we invented a tractor, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution if a lot of people weren't needed on the farm and ran into a city and manned the factories and did the things. And so you always see that we also iterate forward, and it does endemically change us and what we find our paradigm to be. Right. And then that brings it back to your question of, if you view it with one paradigm, I hate the fact that they're able to track me everywhere. And if you view it through another paradigm, it might have different implications. And I think that's the way I would say it in my mind. Didn't mean to get all philosophical, George. Sorry.
No, this is that's why we just take the road wherever it takes us. Well, I do think they're, not to get it super sci-fi. Remember, another movie out there. Remember Mark Wahlberg in Shooter?
Yep.
Guy was totally off the grid, right? Like that to go find him in the mountains,
Sure.
with the antenna TV. So like there's still those people out there that'll be like, nope, I don't want in on this. Check me out.
But you would seem that because of social proof. So social proof is a British concept from like the 80s or so. They basically theorized that if I took George and he spoke English and I put him in a completely brand new culture and he watched everybody around him, but we all spoke English, but he had no knowledge of their culture or what they did, like didn't know they ate and sat, and that very rapidly you would follow the example of those and what they're doing around you, right? And it's this concept of that. And so as you see us lean hard into technology, it is very hard to fight the social proof of not having a cell phone these days. It is very hard to fight the social proof of not having a credit card these days. Oh, you don't take credit cards? You only take cash? Or, oh, I can't get money out of the bank because you guys are only open in 4 locations in the city because everything else is an ATM. So you get into these worlds where there's always going to be outliers, but in general, we drift, for good or bad, always towards whatever everyone's doing to some extent.
I'll give you a quick funny. So in Prague, there was like a 30% chance they needed cash.
Okay.
Like they would take euro, or
the
whatever the Czech money is, crown, I think it's called.
Sure.
But like you needed cash, right? So like every night we'd end up at this pizza place, and we'd be like, "Oh, that's right, they need cash." And then somebody ended up having to go down the street to get to an ATM. So like that's one. Two, I did not see a single electric car anywhere in Prague while I was there.
Fair. A lot of bicycles.
Oh yeah, but I've dropped this on this podcast a few times, but there's 1.3 million registered residents in Prague, so a little smaller than like the city of Philadelphia proper, right? Yeah, exactly, right. How many cars are registered of the 1.3 million residents? How many cars?
Yeah, I don't know, probably 20,000.
How about 1 million cars?
How many residents?
1.3 million.
What would you think that ratio would be here in the US?
I have no idea. I didn't look it up. I just thought that was way too high.
You? I guess for a major city, I would agree, right? I mean, in the sense that just density wise, but I'm also not that geographically familiar with Prague from a disposition of how large the city is either. So
yeah, that's true. Now I will tell you. So that was an interesting stat. And another stat was that beer was cheaper than water.
Man, I need to find this place of honey.
and they said in multiple places, this is not just one person, that they are the largest alcohol consuming country in the world. And I'm like, how is that possible? Like, just on population density.
Do you mean like
alone,
by volume or by human by volume?
They
right?
just
like
said period.
That's pretty impressive because they don't have the highest density of humans.
I know. So I was like, I okay, cool. And then like, that was the birthplace of the Pilsner beer, which every other Pilsner beer ever created was based off of.
Well, there you go. They're just drinking really low alcohol percentage. So we haven't really got down to ABV outcome then potentially. Maybe it's not like the vodka situation in other countries, maybe. But
and last one for you that I think you'll love. 90% of beer is water.
That's fair. It's the 10% alcohol that really gets you. And wheat or whatever, fermented product and sugars that were there.
Yeah, so I thought it was actually pretty cool city. We'll have to find our way there someday.
Man. I've never been one of these days. So
definitely goes back in time a little bit, and you feel a little bit.
So what do we have coming up? Little Johnny foreshadowing. What do we have coming up together?
Well, so we do have Community Minds coming up in Denver, right? That's after Beyond, right? So I'll see you at Beyond, obviously, but you'll be bouncing around like a ping pong ball. Then we have Community Minds in Denver, so that's perfect because it's right in the backyard of the pod that you got over there at PAX8. And then, like, by the way, the summertime gets pretty busy, right? So, like,
and what date is Community Minds? That's June when or July?
So that's August 14th.
Oh,
and 15th.
Thank God! I think in week by week, so that felt really close. But okay, after Beyond in August. Okay, good.
So August is actually August is probably pretty busy, right? So the first week of August is ChannelCon in Vegas.
Yep.
Second week of August, we're doing Community Minds.
The 14th and 15th is Community Minds.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then right after that is an exchange event, I believe, in Nashville.
Yep.
I could be wrong. And then there's the Taylor Business Group Big in Fort Lauderdale. Like literally, it's like a machine gun. And then once you get into Denver or into September, I think you are one of the guys that is involved in Can IT Cup.
I am going to be speaking on the second day. Got a little bit of a travel conflict because I will be flying. I'll be in Denver doing one of our new events that we have, which is really awesome. I won't spoil their announcement. That would be wrong. And then I'll be flying up to Banff to do the next day speaking engagement. I think so Tuesday I'll be speaking, and I think Rob Ray also may be up there. I'm not sure exactly who else going, but I know I'm going to be heading there. So
I mean, obviously, we keep on running into each other. I know we'll probably run into each other in November at the very, very end of the year, right? At IT Nation.
Oh yeah.
So like that's the one that everybody.
I don't know. I might have enough shell shock. I can't show up at IT Nation Connect. Like I might fear my beard being removed, and like when I walk towards the door, like I won't be able to physically pull the door open, right? Like I'm afraid of that.
I thought the beard was one and done on the beard shaving competition.
Oh, it is, but I just there's a PTSD aspect to it. Yeah, totally.
Well, you definitely want to make it there because we are we have a short list of bands that you all know, right? Radio recognizable
awesome.
bands.
I'll be there. I'm teasing.
We'll make sure that it's a good time. And quite frankly, I think that there's a handful of people in the industry where we should do like a leaderboard on travel.
Yeah,
I wonder.
I bet Jay-Z. I bet Jay-Z is going to be higher, right? Jay-Z, right? Then he goes by JP or Jay-Z.
JP or from Texas or Jay-Z the mayor.
Jay-Z the mayor. I bet his numbers exceed mine by a grandiose nature.
No,
he just doesn't post as many pictures on LinkedIn about it.
Okay, all right. We should come up with a way to do the leaderboard.
Some index, like number of segments of flights, number of city changes, number of time zone changes. Like those would be pretty good in telling. Like you went like 12 time zones, right, when you went to Prague or something. So
it was crazy. No, actually, I still think it was only 6 hours ahead. I still think they're on the edge of Central European time. But
gotcha.
All that being said, I definitely live the work from anywhere mentality.
Yep.
That's clear. But it's a lot easier. Like back in the day, we would like switch SIM cards between countries. Now
Right.
it's kind of been
Pay
streamlined,
90
right?
bucks a
Like,
day and you're in. Yeah. Or whatever the data set is that
well,
you have to pay.
now it's like with every carrier on the US side, it's like $10 a day, right? And then they just pick whichever the fastest carrier is.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you have the 5G, which everybody does. So so that's made it a little bit easier. But I will say this, working on the road and traveling at the same time is difficult. Not everybody can do that.
I don't think people understand what it costs. Like, I don't think people understand the just the chaotic nature, the logistics challenges, the planning for things. I think the failure on my part around logistics is really rough. I mean, it's just so tough to know what state you'll be in, what the time zone shift does, so you're working at different hours. You're typically, when you're on the road, in the definition you're giving, it starts at 6 or 7 a.m. You try to get through whatever coffee you can meet somebody for, or a call, or meetings, or stuff you have to work on. And then you're usually, if you're doing it right, in my opinion, you're absorbing those conferences, you're talking to people, you're engaged most of the time, you're sitting there learning from the things in the sessions you can make. And then you finish up by going to a dinner. And then eventually after that, you're going to sit at a bar and talk to somebody about something that you're passionate about and they're passionate about, and it changes lives until 1 a.m. And then you're going to get back up and leave for a 5 a.m. flight to the airport. You're going to drive and come back and I'm not trying to put poor pitiful me. That's not the intention. I just don't think people understand why it feels so presidential from a cost to the human body and overall capabilities
Well,
perspective.
so,
It's a
a
lot.
couple of tips on the way out the door for anyone that thinks that it's all lifestyles of the rich and the famous, but I promise you, it's a lot. Like Matt said, it's a lot hard. One, when you have multiple days of limited sleep, it will come and pay yourself back at some point. That's number one. Two, because you're moving more, right? Like your steps, so like you take the limited sleep and the movement, those are counter to each other, right? That only hurts you,
Yeah.
right? Because like
Yeah.
you're not ready
But
for
it does help for like exercise, I will say. I
No,
bustle
fair,
so
fair.
much that as long as I don't eat, I lose like 5 pounds a trip
But
and
hold
come
on,
back, So
You forget to drink water. You dehydrate.
you do. And that's part of 3 of those pounds. I would bet.
So then
Yeah.
you add the alcohol in there,
It's a
right?
diuretic
That
as well. Yeah.
that plays its toll. And then
As I drink my
just
giant tea, so it's cool.
right. So you add all of those things together, the alcohol, you're moving more, more walking, more whatever, lack of
Yep.
sleep, dehydration, and then you're just around more people. You add all that
Mhm.
together, it's like the absolute guaranteed ticket for the conference flip.
Yeah, for sure. I will say though, I've actually, I think I've found a healthy balance. That's a terrible thing to say because it's not ever true. But I think that, I've cut off drinking more when it's later, the more I'm on the road, right? Like I may have a drink in my hand, but I'm maybe holding it for a minute unless some like ambitious waiter comes and takes it from me, like at your party last week or yesterday, 2 days ago. He's like, "Hey, thank you, sir." I'm like, no, I was still holding that. It was a dummy drink. Okay.
Like, here's a new margarita. Have fun.
yeah. But I think the other side of it, and Paul Vetter drove me to this. Henry Tim, same thing. Shout out. I exercise now every time I'm somewhere, and I work out, and a lot of my travel is broken up by travel for me to exercise. Like that. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's my first of what's going to be 6. Almost 100-mile rides this year that I hope to accomplish. And, this next one's going to be 100 miles. This was a 50 and a 60, but I'm trying to balance in my charity aspects that are recharging and my exercise aspects. And what's really funny, George, this goes all the way back to, do you remember the HTG life plans that they would talk about doing?
Oh yeah, I do remember. Yeah.
And so I went and did one with Rich, and Rich sat me down in Clarinda, Iowa at the farm right next to, where Harlan is, or where Arlen is. And we walked through this process of, Matt, let's talk about your life. Let's map it out. What are the good things? What really sucked? Let's do that on a map. And you show that it's been a growth over time, but it's got its ups and downs. You start digging into the concept of it's always about recharge cycles. And it's also got a corollary to cybersecurity, right? That saying we're always going to protect is bullcrap. It's about the whole cycle. It's about responding and recovering after detecting properly and faster. So the point is that I learned in that there's a recharge cycle that has to play out. And it gets infinitely harder when you're traveling on the road because you can't create cadence. You have to create activities, even though the cadence may change and when they fall in the day and when they happen. So I think to say, how do you succeed well on the road? You have to find what recharges you. For me, it's bicycling and exercise. You have to find how you serve your spiritual side, whether that's through church or whether that's through charity. In my case, it's mostly charity and giving back. and you start figuring out how do you cyclically understand and recharge those cycles. And for me, I struggled very hard last year, but this year I've been home, I think almost double. I was home 46 days last year. I think this year I've already been at about 30. So I'm probably going to get closer to 60, 70. And I'm now making those like massive recharges. Like now it's time for a 50 or 60 mile ride on my own. And now it's time to go just spend time with my wife or whatever it may be, separately. But I think it's all about finding those balances and recharge cycles. And if you don't do them, then you get to an end. And then to your point, you still have to focus on drinking more water. And so what do? I buy, $3.99 Pellegrinos, at the place, or you drink some of the nice lemon water in the hotel and grab a couple bottles when you go. And it's just about being intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone that I know a lot of MSPs that may listen to these podcasts probably don't leave the office as much as we're on the road, but hey, listen, if you do travel on any regular and it's more than just a couple of days for a conference where it's like, your cheat days, there is a way to do it where like you're not going to come back just completely drown out straight to urgent care, on the meds for 2 weeks. Cause like we've all been there. I promise there's a way.
And it's funny because like back to your initial statement of, 53% of those guys had never been to a conference. I think what tends to happen at that is way too much excess. And people getting too drunk that it's valuable. And I don't think that happened here. I mean, I think there was some component of that for certain people, but I think for the most part, they did a good job as camp counselors, making sure that even though they're the ones that typically drink that much, yes, I'm pointing at all of you, they did keep it to a manageable level. They kept people functional. And I saw almost as many seats and, butts and seats the next day as the first day. And so even though you're talking about being a cheat day, I think they did a good job of strategically limiting that in ways that was really interesting. I think they did a great job.
So let me put that in George terms. It was casual drinking, not a rager.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. Thanks for taking Matt words and making them make sense to everybody else.
Just putting it out there. Like we can do things without like, the rave, right? We can make it happen. I promise.
Yeah. And it was a good time for all.
100%. By the way, really appreciate you taking an hour here today. I know you're like literally wall to wall on calls all day long. Very excited for Pax8 Beyond. Very excited to have you out for Community Minds in Denver. I'm going to see you a ton for the rest of the year. So like I always learn, some cool thing, we'll find a new topic to always talk about. So, good news is you're like a pay it forward guy. So like the best thing I recommend to people with anyone on these sessions is reach out to you. Like, even if it's just to talk shop, like hook, no string, right? Like you're really
pretty much
valuable resource. So,
I'm blessed to have Pax8 pay me to just build everyone else's capabilities and my own. It's a really interesting and awesome position to be in. So yeah, good call out, George.
Awesome. So if you don't know where to find Matt Lee, other than Googling him, LinkedIn, whatever, I believe his site is cybermattlee.com.
Cybermattlee.com. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Perfect. So you can hit him up there, and dude's pretty responsive. And if you ever have a chance to run into him in person, expect a conversation like this, but probably a little bit deeper.
I can get deeper if we need to.
100%. This session was recorded. Find out MSPinitiative.com shortly. We'll see Matt on the road. Hopefully everybody has a chance to go check out Pax8, check out MSPinitiative.com, check out cybermattlee.com. We'll catch you on the next one, guys. Appreciate you.